Worldwide wisdom, as we're talking today about deathbed confessions of a Torah sage. We're on page 294 in the Talmud. We're making our way through towards the end of chapter 4 of Brachos, of the first tractate in the Talmud. Let's see what happens when one of the greatest sages of Jewish history, Rabbi Yochanan ben Xakkai, was on his deathbed. Rabbi Yochanan ben Xakkai, it's not the first time that he died. What we're about to read right now is not the first time that he died, because it is this Torah sage to whom we owe the continuity of Judaism. It's important to understand who Rabbi Yochanan ben Xakkai was. He lived in the days of the Romans, during the Roman siege on Jerusalem, and he was living inside of Jerusalem. He had a nephew who was in charge of the, there was tremendous complications, politics within the city of Jerusalem with regards to the Roman siege. Okay. What was the complications? Can you just check if I'm on, Keith? Do you want to check if I'm on YouTube? What was the complication? The question was like this. The sages wanted to surrender and make a ceasefire deal. When do you make a ceasefire? You make a ceasefire if you're going to lose. That's when you make a ceasefire. But if you're going to win, you don't make a ceasefire. Right? So the sages were grossly outnumbered, outgunned by the mighty Roman army. They had no way of actually withstanding the siege. We're on, right? They had no way of actually withstanding the siege of the Roman conquest. We're talking about the year 69 CE right now. So, not? Okay, whatever. So, whatever, it is what it is. So, they had no way of withstanding the Roman siege. So, that's why the sages wanted to make a deal. They wanted to say to the Romans that we're here, and we want to make a deal. We want to live, because you know how the Romans dealt with their conquests. Any nation that the Romans ever conquered, what happened to them? They just disappeared. Either they became Romans or they just died. However, they were they called them the Biryonim. The Talmud calls them Biryonim, which were the hooligans or the fighters, the resistance inside of Jerusalem, and they refused to allow their Jews to make a deal with the Romans. The head of these fighters was the nephew of Rabbi Yochanan ben Xakkai. So Rabbi Yochanan ben Xakkai calls in his nephew and he says, "Listen, do me a favor. We gotta survive. You guys are gonna destroy us. If you're gonna keep on fighting the Romans, by the time they break through the siege, by the time they get into the city, they're gonna kill us all." He says, "I'd like to help you, uncle, but it's nothing I could do because my own subordinates will kill me if I change." So what he did is that he negotiated a deal with his nephew to fake his own death. Rabbi Yochanan ben Xakkai faked his own death. He then they put him into a coffin. And there's a law till this day that you don't bury anybody in Jerusalem. In the old city of Jerusalem, you don't bury anybody because it's the holy city.
Not in the gate.
Not in the walls of the city. In fact, if anybody dies in Jerusalem today, they don't let them stay overnight. They're under the ground before midnight, which means somebody could be walking down the street having a nice day, 5 p.m., 6 p.m. By midnight, they're under the ground if they died. If something happened to them. It's pretty quick. there's no there's no waiting period. There's no grace period there, right? During the 6-day war, the Jews were under siege inside the old city, or maybe it was the Yom Kippur War. Couldn't have been the 6-day war. Because the 6-day war, there were a few fighters that died inside the city, and they're actually buried inside the city. Yeah, there's like a little tiny cemetery. There's actually, if you walk into the old city, very interesting. If you walk into the old city, Jaffa Gate of the old city, and you look on the left side, on the right side, you got the David Citadel. But on the left side, you see these two little graves behind a little iron fence. Who are these guys? Two people buried at the entrance. The story goes that they were the two architects of the wall of Jerusalem. They were built by the Ottoman Empire. The walls around the city were built by the Ottomans, and they liked them so much, the king liked it so much, that he didn't want any other city in the world to have the same wall. So how's he going to make sure that doesn't happen? He killed them. So he gave them at least the courtesy of burying them near the wall that they had built. So that's why it's very nice, right? So that's why they're buried right there at the entrance. So he buried them right there at the entrance of the Jaffa Gate, and they buried there. But under normal circumstances, nobody's buried inside of the city, and that's why when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai feigned his own death, they carried him outside of the city. Even the Romans somehow had a deal with the Jews that allowed them to carry the dead out of the city, out of the siege. Very interesting, right? So comes Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, and he's being carried out of the city in his coffin, and now the guards, the ruffians, the hooligans, the Jewish hooligans, wanted to check that he's really dead. So they wanted to stab the coffin to make sure he's really dead. So the students carrying him said, "Are people going to say that you stabbed your Rebbe?" Then they said, "At least let's shake him to feel if he's the same weight, because apparently a dead person weighs a lot more than a living person." Have you ever seen that? No. Dead person becomes bloated. Yeah, it's amazing. It's very interesting. Yeah, there's something. No, you see a dead person becomes bloated. It's a fact, So it becomes heavier, and so they had to negotiate. And these are testy moments, as the students said to the hooligans. They said, "What are they going to say that you shook your Rebbe, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai?" They let him through. He goes out and he comes out to Vespasian, goes straight out to Vespasian, starts walking, dead man walking, goes to Vespasian, and he says, "Greetings to you, O Emperor." To Vespasian, who was the general of the Romans in charge of the Roman siege. He says, "Greetings to you, O Emperor." Vespasian says, "I'm not the emperor. First of all, that's treason for you to call me the emperor. Treason. And second of all, why didn't you come to me earlier?" Long story. I'm not going to get into the story, all the details of the story. But basically, he said a few moments later, the messenger arrived from Rome with a message that Caesar has died and Vespasian has been appointed in his stead. So this was very impressive to Vespasian. He was very impressed. What Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai managed to do then, because he had a moment of grace, is that instead of asking for the city to be saved, which would have been impossible according to his calculations, he asked that the sages should have safe passage to go from Jerusalem to study Torah, establish a yeshiva, an academy of Torah learning in a place called Yavne. And Vespasian agreed to that seemingly benign request, Vespasian didn't realize that the secret of Jewish continuity is not our buildings. It's our wisdom. It's our Torah. Any Jewish community that moved away from Torah study in the history of our nation fizzled out, disappeared after 2-3 generations. The only Jews that ever survived were those Jews who remained loyal to the study of Torah. And Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai understood that very keenly. What he did was that he moved the sages from the deathly siege of Jerusalem, and he put them into Yavne, which became the bastion of Torah learning, and thus allowed the survival of Judaism. Whereas all other nations that were conquered by the Romans disappeared, the Jews didn't. Why? Because of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai. Now that we understand who he is, let's go study about what happened on his deathbed, page 294. And when Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai became deathly ill, this time for real, his students came in to visit him. When he saw them, he began to cry. This is a very, very famous piece of Talmud. His students said to him, "Light of Israel, right pillar, mighty hammer." That's the interesting titles that they gave him. "Why are you crying?" He said to them, "If I were being led to judgment before a king of flesh and blood, who is here today, and tomorrow the king is in the grave, who if he becomes angry with me, his anger is not an everlasting anger. And if he imprisons me, his imprisonment is not an everlasting imprisonment." In other words, if I were being led to judgment before a human king, right, I would be very concerned. How much more so should I be concerned when I'm being led to judgment before whom? Before Almighty God, who is the King of Kings. That's where he's going with this. And even this mortal king, and even if this mortal king would have put me to death, it's not an everlasting death, since the mortal king can kill me only in this world, but not in the world to come. Moreover, when it comes to a mortal king, I can appease him with words, and I can bribe him with money. But even so, I would cry from fear that he would punish me. So if I was being led before judgment of a king of flesh and blood, a mortal king with all of his imperfections, I would be very, very, very nervous. Now, this is an a fortiori argument. Now I'm being led before the King of Kings, the Holy One, blessed is he, who lives and endures forever and ever. Who, if he becomes angry with me, his anger is an everlasting anger. And if he imprisons me, his imprisonment is an everlasting imprisonment. And if he puts me to death, his death is an everlasting death. Why? Because he can kill me in this world and in the world to come. I'm unable to appease him with words, nor to bribe him with money. Moreover, there are two paths before me, one leading to Gan Eden, and the other one leading to Gehenna. There's two paths before me, one going to paradise, which is where the righteous souls go, and the other one leading to purgatory, which is where the sinful souls go, and I do not know in which they will lead me. These are very, very famous words in the deathbed confession of Rabbi Yochanan ben Xakkai. He says, I do not know where they're taking me. So far, there's two reasons why he's crying. The first reason he's crying is because if I was going before a king of flesh and blood, I would be nervous. Now that I'm going before a king of Almighty infinity, how much more so should I be nervous? That's one reason. A second reason why he's nervous, why he's crying, is because I simply don't know if I'm going to heaven or hell. That's what he said. Really?
That's strange.
That's very strange. Moreover, there are two paths before me, one leading to Gan Eden and the other one leading to Gehinnom, and I do not know which they will lead me, and I should not cry. Folks, how do you understand this?
Not at all. Seems inconsistent with Tanya that we don't have a hell.
Well, he didn't say hell. To his defense, he didn't say hell. Okay, I said hell because it rhymes with heaven. But fine. Okay, fine. Fair enough. Let's talk about this. First of all, we don't believe in hell. Let me support what you just said. We don't believe in hell as Jews. We believe in purgatory. Purgatory comes from the root purging, as in cleansing, because Gehinnom is not a place of eternal damnation as the Christians believe. Rather, it is a place of cleansing, like a dry cleaner. That is the Jewish belief, where you go there because you can't go into a wedding with your dress or your shirt covered in coffee stains. So what you'll do is that you'll go to the trouble of having it cleaned, laundered in a dry cleaner, right, with the heat and everything else, in order to cleanse your garment, and now you'll be ready to go into the wedding. That is the Jewish definition of Gehinnom, of purgatory, right? And that's why by the way, we don't say Kaddish for more than 11 months, because a person can't go to Gehinnom for more than 12 months. A sinful go for 12 months, and a normal person can't go more than 11 months, right? And we don't want anyone to say, well, I'm saying Kaddish for 12 months because my dad was particularly evil. So you don't say that.
Wait, I've said that. That's not nice.
You have actually said that. Okay, forget it.
The exact words.
Yeah. So we don't want to point out anybody, because you can't judge anybody else. We're not here to judge anybody else on who was particularly evil and who wasn't, because you don't know about mental illness, for example. To give you an example, you don't know about mental illness. When you see somebody that's evil to other people, how do you know where that comes from? Could that be because of some sort of childhood trauma of their own experience? Could that be some sort of genetic and inheritance of some awful genes that influence them towards epigenetics? Could that be some sort of inherited trauma, by the way, that they simply are unable to overcome? It's difficult, very difficult to judge other people. Even if you had a parent who was nasty, particularly nasty, think about it. It's not necessarily their fault. Maybe they had an awful upbringing. Maybe they were children of Holocaust survivors. Maybe they endured the Holocaust. Maybe they aren't able to trust. Maybe they aren't able to love freely. Maybe they were abused. Maybe they were hurt. Maybe they were humiliated in their own journey. So it's difficult to judge anybody else. Yes, Jack.
Was he expressing complete trust and supplication to the Almighty?
Was he expressing what?
Complete trust.
And supplication to the Almighty.
Was he expressing complete trust and supplication to the Almighty? I would think that Rabbi Yochanan ben Xakkai was a man of that pedigree to express complete trust and supplication to the Almighty. I would, which is why it's all the more startling that he says, "I don't know which way they're taking me." Seriously, you don't know where you're going, Rabbi? If the Rabbi Yochanan ben Xakkai, who was such an important rabbi, who charted the course of the continuity of Judaism, as I explained moments ago, if he doesn't know where he's going, you know what that does to the rest of us? Achon vei, that's not very, very exciting for the rest of us, right? So, like, what are we supposed to do with this piece of information? Let's take a look. We'll study a little further, right? Page 297. The students, they said to him, teacher, our teacher, bless us. Now, this is also very, very, very beautiful what he tells them. He's going to tell them like this. He says, I'm going to bless you that you are going to fear God, that your respect of God should be as much as you respect a human being. Does that make sense to you?
Wouldn't it be higher? Your respect.
You would think you should say the other way around, right?
Wouldn't you think it would be your respect for?
Should be more than your respect to a human being, right? Here's what he said. He said your respect for God should be as much as you respect another human being. Let's take a look inside and try to understand why. They said to him, our teacher, bless us. He said to them, it be Hashem's will that you should fear heaven or respect heaven as much as you respect a human of flesh and blood. His students asked them, only that far? Like, that's it? That's your question, right? Only that far? Certainly our respect of God must be much greater than our respect of humans. He said to them, Halevai. Halavai means if only your respect of heaven was as great as your respect of men, that alone would be a tremendous aid in preventing you from sinning. Know that this is true. For when a person commits a sin in private, he says, I hope that nobody else will see me. Let me explain. So what happens? You know certain things that you would only do if nobody was watching, right? I mean, not present company, but there are people like this, right? Right? There are people that would do things if nobody else was watching, right? But if somebody else was in the room, would you do that thing? Hell no, you wouldn't. Why? Because you respect that other person. Now, when you're alone, imagine you said, oh, I'm in the presence of God. God is with me. Imagine you looked at God like another person. You would be always in the presence of company. And you would never, burp or whatever behavior or sin that you might do when nobody else is around. Right? So that's the blessing coming out of the deathbed confession of Rabbi Yochanan ben Xakkai. What a beautiful blessing that he's giving his students. How practical. He says, if you could only, after a lifetime of Torah study, he was 120 years old on his deathbed, Rabbi Yochanan ben Xakkai. I believe he passed on his birthday, like Moses and Rabbi Akiva. After a lifetime of Torah study, he says, guys, here's how the cookie crumbles. If you can respect God as much as you respect human beings, you're good. Wow, what a state to aspire towards. How's that for practical? Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was like the master of practicality.
Don't go for perfection.
He's facing this mortal enemy. He's facing the Roman Empire, and he manages to negotiate the survival of Judaism through the Roman Empire. That's how practical this guy is, right? And now, when he's talking to his students on his deathbed, he says, here's what you need to know in order to survive, in order to remain spiritually attuned. All that you need to do is respect God as much as you respect a human being. And if you could do that, then you halavai, he says, if only, you won't come to sin. Yeah.
The insight on
Isn't it the other way?
297.
Well, he's not agreeing with me yet.
Isn't it respect humans as you would respect God?
Well, clearly, he's not.
Because
That's
you
not what he's
said
saying.
respect God as you would.
I didn't say
Wouldn't
that.
it
He
be the
said
other
that.
way?
That's what the rabbi said.
It makes sense what he was saying, because you're aware when someone else walks in the room and you wouldn't do something. But sometimes you're not aware that God's there.
You understand what I'm saying?
So I would view it.
The way you behave in the presence of another person is conscious of that other person.
Mm-hmm.
But when you're all by yourself, you say, I'm all by myself. Nobody's here. It's a good story about these kids. They come to this dessert buffet. And I can't remember the details of the story, but they see the dessert buffet. And they see by the big chocolate fondue, they say, don't take more than one apple, toffee apple, chocolate fondue.
Yeah.
Don't take more than one because God is watching. Okay? So the one kid says to the other, he says, take as many licorice as you want. God is watching the apples. So imagine if you could live your life in a way where you're conscious of the presence of God like another person in your life. And by the way, I want to encourage you about prayer as well. That prayer is something that you don't only do inside the synagogue. You could be talking to God all day, every day. And in fact, we do that when people ask us how we're doing, we say, Baruch Hashem, I'm not feeling that great today. Baruch Hashem, it could be better. Business, thank God, it's okay, but Emir Hashem, God willing, it's going to be good. We're constantly referring to God in our casual conversations. And also, we're supposed to be talking to God all day. You're supposed to be talking to God. Instead of just, cursing about something bad that happens to you, what you could do is you're supposed to talk to God and say, God, Gott in Himmel, Father in heaven. Why are you doing this?
Better yet, Father, right here.
What?
When you talk to him, you don't think of God in heaven.
Yeah, you could talk to him right here. Exactly. Very good. Let me just finish this piece. The Brisa continues. At the time of his death, he said to his students, remove the utensils from the house.
Burger?
God's calling.
At the time of his death, he said to his students, remove the utensils from the house because of the tumah, because of the impurity, and prepare a seat for Chizkiyahu, king of Yehuda, who has come to escort me. Ooh. So he said, look, when I die, he says, then there's going to be impurity, because when there's a dead person in the house, then everything under that same roof becomes impure. So he was sensitive to the fact that the people in that house would need to purify their vessels, and some of them would have to be thrown out because some of them can't be purified. So what he did was, is that he said, take out the vessels before I die. And then he said, make way for Chizkiyahu, king of Yehuda. Now, Chizkiyahu, king of Yehuda, was the king during the siege of
The last.
Assyria. I don't know if he was the king during the siege of Jerusalem of the Romans. I'm not sure who has come to escort me. Now, why is it that he's come to escort me? Let's see the notes. Chizkiyahu came to escort him because Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was his descendant. Chizkiyahu was the king during the Assyrian siege on Jerusalem. That was even before the Babylonians. That was even before the Babylonians. It was in the days of Isaiah the prophet. Yeah. So Rabbi Yochanan was a descendant of his. Alternatively,
It was
Jeremiah was in the days of the Jeremiah.
That was Chizkiyahu.
Jeremiah ben.
Chizkiyahu. Yirmiyahu ben Chizkiyahu min HaKohanim.
That was a different Chizkiyahu. That was a different Chizkiyahu.
Oh.
Alternatively, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was about to join Chizkiyahu's particular group in Gan Eden. Either way, Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai says, listen, King Chizkiyahu is coming to join me, so guys, let's be respectful, okay? Bottom line is, let's try to wrap this up. So what I think we can understand the teaching that he said. I do think we can understand that why he said that you should respect God as much as you respect the person. But why was it that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai said, I don't know which direction they're taking me? Why is he saying that? Why is he saying that I don't know if I'm going to heaven or to purgatory? Why would he not know? Can anybody understand this?
No, I don't.
The Rebbe explains it to mean that he was so focused on the mission, he was so focused on what he had to do, that he didn't give himself an assessment, like an appraisal. Now, I never really understood that. I'll be honest with you. I never really understood that because today we're in the last days of the month of Elul. Elul is the month of Teshuvah, of return. And just like in a business, you have to take stock, inventory, to see if you're making money or losing money, right? Every year you got to stop for a little bit, a few weeks, and you got to figure out if your business model is actually working or not. So too, in our spiritual endeavor, what we're supposed to do is that we're supposed to actually evaluate how we're doing spiritually. Are we going in the right direction or the wrong direction? So I never really understood why it was that Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai didn't know which direction they were taking him in. Unless maybe he lived in such difficult times, which actually makes more sense. Could be that he lived in such difficult times that he didn't have time to worry about his own spiritual well-being and health and wellness. He was so focused on the continuity of Judaism, and I think that might be the answer. This guy was dealing with a house on fire. Judaism was a house on fire. The Jewish religion, the Jewish people, were facing an existential threat, and Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai was shepherding the Jewish people from the frying pan into a state of freedom, relative freedom. And I think maybe that's the reason that he wasn't doing any personal assessment, evaluation about figuring out which direction he's going. In other words, why would it be that he would be going to purgatory? The question was he fulfilling his potential? That's really the question here. Obviously, he was a righteous man. Of course, he was a righteous man. We know that. The question is, like Rabbi Zusha said, Rabbi Zusha Avanipoli, the student of the Baal Shem Tov, he said, when I get up to heaven, nobody's going to ask me in heaven, Rabbi Zusha, why weren't you like Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob? Rabbi Zusha, why weren't you like Moses and Aaron and King David? They're not going to ask me that. They're going to say, Rabbi Zusha, why weren't you the potential of Rabbi Zusha? Why didn't you fulfill your potential? Think about this for a second, guys. How many of us are living our lives in a way that we're just like sort of cruising? We're just cruising. Versus, have you thought about the unique skill set that you've been endowed with? Have you thought about this? About the gifts that God has granted you, the unique gifts that only you have? What are you doing about those gifts? Are you just sort of like, spinning your wheels, paying the bills in order to be able to survive? Or are you actually living your potential? Are you fulfilling your dream? I have to tell you, on a very personal level, for me, this is quite a recent challenge. Thank God our Chabad has grown, and we've reached a place of where I'm not. I don't have to be involved in every little detail of the Chabad. Thank God, it's so beautiful. For example, in the minyan here, the minyan runs whether or not I'm here. I love that, and that there's there's different people that are able to run the community in different levels, which is very, very special and very beautiful. So I'm able to ask myself about my own potential, if I'm using my own potential, or if I'm just spinning my wheels. And I think this is a question that every one of us has to be asking ourselves. If you're a writer, if you're a thinker, if you're a speaker, if you're if you're an influencer.
I have a comment and a question.
Yeah.
First of all, I think it would have been highly egotistical for him to say, "I got it made. I'm making it to heaven." I don't think he was that kind of an individual. Second, aren't we all graded on a curve? Do you? I think I remember.
To your first point. You're asking. You're saying it's highly egotistical. First of all, welcome to all of our friends online. Beautiful to see everybody here. Any comments or questions, please feel free to post. Your first point is that it seems that it's egotistical for him to say, "Oh, and by the way, I'm going to heaven." For that we say shvaik. Shvaik means silence. You don't have to say, "I'm going to heaven." You could have said nothing. Why he needed to say, "I don't know which way they're taking me," why this was necessary, that's a big question over here.
Because only God knows. So if he says, "I know," then he's saying,
yeah, but he could have kept his mouth shut. He could have said nothing. He didn't have to say, "I don't know which direction." He could have just said, "Look, I know that I'm righteous. I know that I'm going,
But the second is, aren't we all graded on a curve? Someone who's, he shines shoes. He barely knows he's Jewish, but he does something a little more. He does a little prayer. He goes to show. Doesn't he get more credit than someone who spent a whole lifetime in the yeshiva and learns and doesn't meet? I mean, you can't keep these people. I don't think you can hold them to the same standard.
I don't think anybody's judged to the same standard as anybody else.
Correct.
I think that everybody's judged. I wouldn't call it a curve. I'd call it an individual, customized evaluation. Every person needs to be evaluated based upon their own specific circumstance. And therefore, think about it this way, when somebody was raised by a Holocaust survivor who turned his back on God after the Holocaust and taught his child that there is no God and that we hate God, the God that doesn't exist, that God we hate, right? Imagine, people like this. And now this guy, you're going to grade him on in heaven, they're going to grade him on what kind of Jew he is. How do you can't hold this guy, But then again, think about it this way. Look at this YouTube, right? We've got this YouTube class right now. This Torah study is available for everybody. And you can't walk around and say, "Oh, I have Holocaust survivor syndrome." You can't walk around the rest of your life and say, "Well, I am spiritually handicapped and I have no possibility of ever reinventing myself." Sorry, Charlie, it doesn't work like that anymore, right? You know the story of where the guy dies in the flood and he says, "God, where were you?" And he says, "I sent you 2 boats and a helicopter." Right. Hello, I sent you 12,000 YouTube videos. I sent you a rabbi, knocked on your door 10 times and you slammed the door in his face, right? You know what I'm saying? The rabbi kept on emailing you, kept on sending you flyers, inviting you over for coffee, and you refused to come. That doesn't count anymore, right? So in other words, folks, we're living in a very conscious time. We're very aware. We're very conscious. We have the great fortune of living in the United States of America. I mean, can you imagine living in Israel right now? Half the country is in bomb shelters. It's terrible. It's so terrible. And I don't even understand. Israel's telling the UNIFIL, United Nations, whatever that FIL stands for, to go north of the river, right, to be safe. What are these guys doing there anyways? Wasn't there a United Nations agreement that the south of Lebanon was going to be demilitarized, right, in order for Israel to give them a 2-state solution? That was the 2-state solution.
You're
I am digressing, but I have to say this. So I should say it wasn't. So Israel is under. I am totally digressing. I apologize. But Israel's under fire. We in America have this great fortune of being able to live very calm lives. Where our biggest problem right now is, are interest rates going to go down 0.5% or 0.75%? This is what we're worrying about. Seriously, we live in a time where knowledge is available. You can't say, "Well, my teacher in Hebrew school was mean, and that's why I didn't learn any Torah." Move on. Get over it. There's plenty other teachers out there. There's plenty other rabbis that you can connect with. Don't get stuck.
But the whole point is, when you get to a traffic signal, red is red, green is green, yellow is yellow. There's no ambiguity. But here, you really don't know. I mean, how do you know until you ultimately get judged as to whether
You don't know, that's the whole point.
that's my
what he's
point,
trying to
and
say.
that's what
Were
he
you
was
the best
saying.
version
There
of
is
you?
no
Yeah.
objective criteria.
Well, that's why
It's
you have to
measured
do.
against yourself.
You have to do your
That's
best
what
to
he's
be the
saying.
best version of yourself. That's it. That's the bottom line.
Against you.
And the question, my understanding of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai is that he wasn't sure if he had fulfilled his potential. Think of it this way. Look at a rabbi during the Holocaust. Okay, a rabbi during the Holocaust who runs around. There was actually a rabbi. I think his name was Rabbi Silver. He'd run around on Shabbos in taxis. He'd go in a taxi to all the shuls in New York, and he would get into the bima and he would shout because you had to go by taxi to make sure to get to all the shuls in time. And he would scream about the Holocaust. He would say, "Look, the Jews are being gassed and burned alive in Germany and under German rule. Where we got to do something about this, right?" So this rabbi was he wasting his time or was he doing the right thing, right? He was sort of shepherding the Jewish people through a state of survival. Well, you could have been a Torah sage. You could have been meditating. That's an interesting question about what he could have been doing, right? So Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai, that's why I gave you that introduction about him. He lived in this incredibly precarious time when the future of Judaism was actually in peril. There was actually, I mean, remember, there was only 2 tribes remaining after the Assyrian conquest, 2.5 tribes. And after the Assyrian conquest. And now these 2.5 tribes are under siege by the Romans. This was a terrible, terrible time for the Jewish people. And he was very busy with allowing safe passage for the sages to allow a Torah study to continue. This is a big question on whether he was fulfilling his potential or not. And that's why I understood him that way. Let's just take a quick look at the notes over here at the bottom of 295. Some explain the 2 paths spoken by Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai as follows. When a person is judged by a court of flesh and blood, the outcome of the trial is limited to either punishment or freedom. If he is found guilty, he is punished, and if he is acquitted, he is set free. Reward, however, does not figure into the case. It's freedom or punishment. Not so by one who is judged by the King of Kings. Here, the difference between acquittal and conviction is the difference between punishment and reward. If the outcome of the trial is favorable, the person will delight in Gan Eden, in paradise, in addition to being spared the agony of Gehinnom. Conversely, if he is convicted, not only will he suffer retribution, but he also forfeits the reward in Gan Eden. I don't understand one word of what we just said over there. This is what Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai meant. Unlike the outcome of a trial before a mortal king, where the alternatives are only punishment or release therefrom, here the stakes are higher. I stand not only to be led down the path to Gehenna, but I would thereby experience the terrible pain of having lost the opportunity to delight in Hashem in Gan Eden. For this I cry. Okay, whatever. I'm not getting into that because I don't like that. Sorry, forgive me. I'm not okay with that interpretation. I don't like it. I think that my interpretation is better. That it's about him being so busy putting out the fire that he didn't have the time like we do today to evaluate who we are, where we're going, where we're coming from. I want to give you a very practical example, folks. I want you to think for a moment about your closet right now at home. I want you to think about your closet. Where you keep your clothing. No, don't say, "Oh, why are you groaning?" Okay. Okay. So I want you to think about your closet. And now I want you to think about your parents' closet when you were growing up. Okay. Right? Think about that. I want you to think about your kitchen when you were growing up, and think about the kitchen now. Right? Or kitchens, right? Because you might have 2 houses right now, right? So think about that. I want you to realize that you've been granted such prosperity, so much more than the previous generation, right? Generally speaking, our generation is perhaps the most affluent generation in Jewish history. And the question is, what do we do to deserve this, right? With affluence comes responsibility, because I spoke about this on Shabbos. The test of wealth is far, far more difficult than the test of poverty. God has granted us the ability to live in a free country, the United States of America. He's granted us the ability to have a state of Israel that has self-determination and ability to protect itself. God has granted us the ability to have affluence and wealth, right? To be tremendously independent. And the question is, what are you doing with all those resources? Are you resting on your laurels and not challenging yourself spiritually? Or are you allowing that physical, financial bounty to motivate your spiritual surge, what previous generations were unable to do because they were so busy struggling to keep things together? We are the most abundant generation in Jewish history, potentially speaking. And that's why I challenge you to consider if you are fulfilling your potential. This is my understanding of Rabbi Yochanan ben Zakkai's self-analysis on his deathbed. His confession was, I don't know where I'm going, but the question is, do we have the right to make the same declaration? Or are we just being downright lazy by saying, I don't know because I'm going to play golf? Roland Kettle, not everyone fits in a box. Those theologians have their calling and the shoe shiner has his calling. However, the meaning it appears to be when David slew Goliath, he actually used his simple sling. I agree with you. We are all judged on a case-by-case basis. Big things happen from every even small steps. Very good. Thank you very much, everybody. This is Deathbed Confessions. I want to make sure that you know that on your deathbed, what are you going to be saying? I want you to think about this. What are you going to be telling your loved ones on your deathbed? I was recently at a deathbed. I was recently by someone's deathbed, and I couldn't believe the deathbed confession. I couldn't believe it. It was financial. It was shallow. It was like the person was in the middle of a contract with someone, and he wanted to make sure to collect payment from that one and to make payment to the other one. And I couldn't believe it. I'm like, that's it?
That's
Well, King David to Solomon said on his deathbed, take revenge on this guy,
Yeah.
take revenge on
Right.
that guy.
He had to settle accounts. But friends, I want you to think about what is going to be in your deathbed. What are you going to say? Are you going to say, I wish I spent more time in the office? I wish I bought that other property. Or are you going to say, I wish I spent more time with my children? Or are you going to say, I wish I spent more time with my neshama, with my soul? Are you going to say, I wish I spent more time studying Torah, and I wish I had the courage to reinvent myself and to fulfill my deepest potential? Have a great day, everybody.
I lived the life I wanted to live. I lived a life